Tyler, we are live whenever you're ready to go.
Sorry, we're live and Tyler, we're ready to go. That's all I heard. Now we just got to get Tyler ready to go. Okay. Okay, so it's close to 7 o'clock here. We'll get started with our meeting. With agendas in front of us. Any changes or issues? Mr. Schmidt.
I just wanted to make two changes on page 25 of the package.
Yes.
You'll have two motions there. The FIR return is not attached to the report, and we'll bring it at a later date.
So we'll not make that motion?
Correct, yeah, and it's not attached. And on page 36 of the agenda package,
Yeah.
there is a typo. It says 2018, and it should say 2019.
Okay. Those are pretty significant changes. Do you think we should just table this and bring it back in another meeting or no? Apparently not. Okay, anything else? Councillor Busk.
Make a motion to accept the agenda as amended.
Theoretically, we didn't amend
As presented.
all the stuff in there, so we'll just say presented. Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? I see everybody's hands. Internet is working good, except for Joy now is out. I'm gonna go with carried. Okay. So next we've got minutes of our previous meetings held on page 3 in our package. This is on the council meeting on May 5th. Any issues? Going once, going twice. Councillor Brandel.
I'll make a motion, we accept them as presented, please.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Carried. Perfect. Next, I gotta do this. Next, we've got the ones on page 11 in our package from the Committee of the Whole on May 12th. Any issues? Going once, going twice. Sold to the first person who wants to put their hand up. Councillor Gramlich, go for it.
Make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented from the Committee of the Whole meeting, May 12th.
Thank you. Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Joy, I'm not sure why yours lags a little bit on mine, but you're the only one that does it, so I'm thinking it's your connection. CEO update, we'll jump in. Mr. Lundy.
Your worship, you have the update. I don't have much to add except that weekly we have a teleconference with the Alberta Emergency Management Agency.
Okay.
And today there was a couple interesting points made. A question on visitor information centers, and they said that as long as they comply with all of the medical officers' dictates, that it could go ahead and open. There was a lot of questions about playgrounds, and it was noted that it's the individual responsibility of people using the playground to make it safe for whoever. And outdoor funerals can be held to a maximum limit of 50 people as long as the social distancing takes place. So just as additional stuff. So, and I'm open to any questions, and Gary is here also, and Roland.
Yeah, and so I know that we also have it in camera tonight, and some of that is in regards to personnel. So I do have some questions about the Visitor Information Center and that sort of thing, but because it involves staffing, we'll maybe wait till we get into it then to get some clarity before we move forward. Questions from council? Anything for CEO update? Nothing. Okay, that's great. It usually means people are happy. I like it. Okay, let's keep moving along then. We'll jump into external audit. I should know that already. Alan's like, what am I here for, right? So Alan is Alan Doyle is on our Zoom meeting tonight there. And I think you're going to lead us off. Is that correct?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight, Mr. Mayor and Council. I think we've been doing this for quite a number of years now for the town of Slave Lake. Anyways, I'd like you to look at page 2 of the financial statement, which I'm not sure what page that is of your agenda.
Page 2 would be 47 in our agenda.
Okay, and that's the start of the audit report. The auditor's report goes 2 pages. I'm not going to read it. I'll give you the highlights. It's labeled the independent auditor's report because we're independent from the town of Slave Lake. We have no connections with the town, financial or otherwise, and we review that every year to make sure that's actually the fact and that's the perception that people have. So it's very important that in our position we're independent so that we're able to express an unbiased opinion. Our opinion is addressed to the members of council of the town of Slave Lake. The opinion paragraph is the first paragraph. And we've issued a clear, unqualified opinion on the financial statements that follow this report. These financial statements, in our opinion, are a fair statement of the financial position at December 31st, 2019. And the results of operations for that period ended. These financial statements are prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards and include all of the required disclosures and information that those standards require. And these statements follow almost exactly the presentation required and put into the Municipal Affairs puts into their sample for financial statements. We conduct our audit in accordance with generally accepted audit standards, and those standards require us to test, verify, do all sorts of things to come up with the formation of our opinion. We perform our audit by assessing risk areas and performing procedures that every other auditor in the country would prepare. So that evidence that we gather forms the basis of our opinion. And we've had no problems with gathering our evidence. Is everybody hearing me okay? My screen's flashing kind of funny.
You're hearing you perfect.
Okay, good. So anyways, Roland and his area prepare these financial statements. We perform the audit and in every regard, we agree with what Roland has prepared, and we had no problems gathering the evidence, the filing systems in the town, the internal controls that the town has. All of these things are operating in a perfect manner as far as we're concerned. and we had no problem gathering the evidence that we required to present this opinion. The report goes for 2 pages. I think I've caught most of the highlights. It's dated Edmonton, Alberta, because that's where I'm sitting right now, and it's dated for May 19th, which is today, and so it includes any and all information up to today's date that would affect values and information that we have disclosed in these financial statements. So as an example, if the town was sued on May 18th, it would have to be included. That fact would have to be included somewhere in these financial statements. And the audit report.
But so far, no one sued us today, so it's good.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
There, so it's all good. And it's dated, it's signed by Doyle and Company, Chartered Professional Accountants. And so that's a brief summary of what's in that audit report, maybe not so brief. In addition, as I mentioned a little earlier, the internal controls are strong, and we're not going to be issuing a management letter that has recommendations for improvement because, you know, there's 100 different ways of doing the same thing. We have no recommendations for improvement with the way the town's internal controls are operating. The town, again, has maintained a strong financial position. And in fact, it's stronger this year than it was last year. And, you know, that really goes a long ways in helping things work the way they're supposed to work. We didn't identify any fraud or errors during the course of our audit.
Always a plus.
We did not have any disagreements with management. There's always things that you find, and all of those issues were small and resolved during the course of the audit. The town's books and records, as mentioned earlier, are in good condition, and we were able to locate everything we went looking for and resolve any of the minor type issues that we may have had during the audit. We think the finance department did a great job in getting the records ready for the audit and drafting the financial statements and making sure we had backup to support everything we went looking for.
Okay, so
That's it.
in short, Roland is awesome, and whatever he's hiding, you can't find it.
That's right.
Okay, that doesn't seem biased at all. Let's keep going.
Your system prevents any of that from happening.
Good, that's what we want to hear. Okay, with that, Roland, why don't you take it away?
Okay, good evening, your worship and members of council.
You need a minute because the blood looks like it's running to your face. You're so excited you're gonna pass out. We'll give you a minute.
Now this room gets pretty hot in here when the doors close.
Okay.
All right, so the purpose of tonight's report here is to present the council the audited consolidated financial statements as at December 31st, 2019. So I'll give you the highlights throughout the financial statements, starting off with the statements of changes in financial position. And we'll just go line by line here. If there's any questions, please let me know. Cash and temporary investments year over year has increased $4.2 million. The town holds funds in FireSmart and grant revenues, as well as an operating line of credit to pay for the sewage lagoon project. Accounts receivable year over year has increased $288,000. This is within normal expected variations. Major receivables for the year are the 2019 MSI contribution of $1 million, demolition costs for hotels at $524,000, and DRP funds for $387,000. Taxes and grants in lieu receivable has increased $67,000, and this is within the normal expected variations. Long-term investments, which is the reserve accounts, increased by $218,000, and that's interest accrued on the investments. Other long-term assets saw a small decrease of $10 for the refund of AFCA shares, and the remaining amount continues to be a long-term receivable. Accounts payable is increased by $916,000, and some of the significant payables that we had at the end of the year include equipment purchases for a wheel loader and a peace officer vehicle, $408,000 for both, and outstanding amounts for the demolition of the hotel costs at $479,000. Employee obligations include overtime and vacation at the end of the year, and that's decreased by $445,000, and that's also within the expected increase and decrease for these liabilities. Other liabilities has increased slightly at $14,000, and this amount includes deposits on water accounts and planning and development deposits. Deferred revenue has increased $944,000. This represents an increase to the MSI, $1 million, and the GTF, $561,000, as well as the deferment of the 2019 over-under levy for the school tax requisitions, as well as a drawdown of Fire Smart's funding as that program rolls out and continues to incur expenses. Long-term debt, major changes there and major inclusions there. Included in long-term debt is the capital lease for Fire Services SCBA equipment purchased in 2018, as well as an RBC operating line for $7 million to pay for the sewage lagoon. Principal reductions in the year amounted to $1.8 million and interest costs of $1 million. Outstanding debt on the government center is scheduled to be paid off June 16th, 2029. It is also included in our long-term debt, and there's roughly $16 million of debt remaining on the loan, which represents the largest portion of debt carried by the town. However, this does not affect the town's debt calculation or its ability to borrow, as there's a ministerial order, and also the government center pays the town for these costs. Other outstanding debt we still have is the town hall, library facilities, and the field house, and there's some small debentures for water lines, the old fire hall, a road, that make up the remaining amounts of the debt for the town. And that is the statement of financial position. Are there any questions on that? If not, I'll just continue on the statement of income. On the revenue section, we have net municipal taxes. Municipal taxation here varies from budget on this line and is reconciled later on. Due to the levy amounts that are included in budget for the provincial levies, this is just the net amount of taxation that the town of Slave Lake has collected. And you can see on Schedule 3 the breakdown that includes the budgeted amount for the total requisitions and taxes. There's slightly higher taxes here than budget, and this is just a result of the outstanding water levies that are transferred to tax rolls that then stop becoming a utility levy and become part of the tax roll itself. User fees and sales of goods. This includes items such as utility fees, cemetery fees, recreation, and fire service fees. Water and sewer revenues came in on budget. Garbage revenues were slightly higher, and as a result, there was a greater than expected budgeted transfer to reserve. Programming fees, pool fees, and MRC fees were all higher than in 2018. And fire services had a fairly good year, bringing in additional revenue through deployments, about $250,000. and its training facility at approximately $130,000. And I just make a note there that these revenues are shared with the MD. So in good years, the MD shares the benefit of these additional revenues. Government transfers for operating shows higher than budget due to DRP funding receivable from the province that was not foreseen during the budget last year, and that is from the evacuation and the flooding events that were close to town. Other amounts in transfers from government include police wage grants, FCSS and Parent Link funding, as well as the recognition of the Fire Smart grant funding, and a small chunk is MSI operating that funds the library. There's a large variation shown here on these statements between 2019 and 2018, and this is simply due to the fact that in 2018 there was a large grant that the town of Slave Lake received on behalf of the airport. Other than that, these are within normal transfers. Development levies, we see no development levies in the 2019 year. There was, I believe, 2 or 3 development levies in 2018, so none were received in 2019, and there's 0 reported there. Licenses and permits includes business license fees and the development permits. Business license revenue was on budget for the year, and development permits fell short of budgeted expectations. Fine revenue accounts for police fines, community enforcement fines, and photo radar. And the highlight there is that the net photo radar funds amounted to $153,000, and that amount was transferred to reserve. Franchise and concession contracts is mainly made up of ATCO franchise fees. Actual amounts for the year were about $47,000 less than the forecasted numbers from ATCO for the year. Moving on to rental income. This income is primarily income generated from the provincial government agreements at about $2.7 million. Other rental income includes recreation rental fees for the pool and the MRC facility, as well as a Points West ground lease. Overall, actual revenues were slightly higher than budgeted expectations. And just a simple note on here from the budget procedure versus this statement is that reserve transfers on this statement aren't shown, and they are shown on the schedule of accumulated surplus. That sums up the revenue section. Is there any questions on that? Seeing none, we'll keep on going on the expenditure side of the statement. Starting off, we have legislative. The cost center encompasses council and its services. Overall, it was slightly under budget, with a main savings coming from professional service for the year, as well as some additional wage costs that had been allocated to the high-level evacuation and local emergencies as council and staff participated in that event. Administration was slightly below budget. Through the operating budget, we account for the project manager. However, that position's costs are allocated to each project, and as such, the variance here is shown slightly greater than actual cost savings. Fire, police, bylaw enforcement, and disaster recovery shows a higher than budgeted expense amount. Police services saw some savings through wages and the contracted service. Final costs for the evacuations and the local disasters for the 2019 year amounted to $500,000, and thus that pushed that above budgeted costs. Roads, streets, walks, and lighting was slightly below budget, and this was mainly a result of the ATCO lighting project not being completed in the 2019 year. Water and wastewater came in under budget only due to the fact that the long-term debentures that were anticipated for the year were not in place, and as a result, we saved some money on the expected interest payments that did not materialize for the year, and this difference was transferred back to reserve. Waste management came in slightly above budget. on revenue side and also on expenses side. However, the net gain was that there was net revenue left over, and the remaining amount has been transferred to the reserve. Family and community supports includes both FCSS and the Parent Link program. And they have stuck to their budgets and carried out their programming. Cemetery just includes the new and old cemetery, and it was slightly under budget in 2019 with some cost savings on repairs and maintenance. Moving along, subdivision planning, land and development has exceeded budgeted costs for the year. Everything else was on budget. However, the hotel demolitions are also included in this section. As they were not part of the original budget, you can see that the costs have exceeded budgeted expectations. And the final cost center here is Parks, Recreation, and Culture, and costs were on budget. Equipment maintenance costs for the year were slightly higher in the past. However, there was some savings with lower gas than predicted gas utility costs. So overall, the community services performed extremely well considering they had run all of the facilities as well as participated to a large degree on the evacuation center and dealing with that situation alongside normal operations. And were able to keep everything going, everything on budgets, and still bring in slightly higher revenues. Amortization, the last expense shown on the page, was below budget for the year. So it had been anticipated that the raw water line and sewage lagoon projects would be completed and operational very early on in the year. These projects are still ongoing, and so you can see a difference between the actuals and budget. And that's just due to the fact that they have not seen operation yet. And that concludes the income statement. Is there any questions?
Okay.
Seeing none, I'll move on to the schedule of changes in accumulated surplus. So I'll just highlight the beginning balances there. The town started off with an unrestricted surplus of $1.5 million, a restricted surplus of 7.4, and an equity and tangible capital assets of $125 million, for a combined total of $133 million. Excess revenue over expenditures, which includes operating revenue and expenditures, as well as capital revenue, but not capital purchases, resulted in net revenues of $4 million. Transfers to reserves amounted to $5.7 million. Just a note on that too, the budgeted amount of $148,000 to land development did not materialize as there was no lot sales for the year. Water and sewer reserve transfers were higher than anticipated as both the raw water line project and the sewage lagoon project were not completed. As a result, long-term debt interest anticipated for the year was not incurred. Moving on there, amounts borrowed from reserve to pay for partial costs of the sewage lagoon project have been repaid through the operating line on RBC. Restricted funds for operations are for the SCBA equipment for fire services, and this amount pays the leasing and interest costs for the year. Current year funds used for tangible capital assets consists of a small communities fund grant for the sewage lagoon project, some GTF and Fire Smart grants, as well as the remainder of the special tax for the road levy. All in all, there was a total of $11.5 million to capital additions in the year. $2.1 million worth of projects have been moved from work in progress to active depreciating assets. There was $7 million worth of financing for the sewage lagoon project, and the net effect on our reserve balance was an increase to reserves by $2.9 million, leaving a final restricted reserve balance of $10.3. I'll move through there. So, after operating revenues and expenses, reserve transfers, capital purchases, and debt repayments, the net effect was an increase in the town's unrestricted surplus of $98,182, leaving an ending unrestricted balance of $1.5 million. Overall, the town's accumulated surplus increased by $4 million. So I think for the general public, and the note there, the number that we attached there is that the town accomplished its goal and had a surplus of $98,000. Any questions on that?
Are you pausing for applause? I got a speech for later. Keep going. Anything else, Roland?
Okay, I'll just highlight some of the major capital additions here for the year.
Roland, a question then. Are you planning to go through the slideshow again after this or no?
No, I didn't want to mess with the technical, so I included the slideshow there for information purposes, but.
Okay, I got a point for that one later. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Major capital additions included the raw water line project, $1.4 million, the sewage lagoon project, $8.1, Fifth Avenue Northwest roads at $340,000, Sawridge lift station, $264,000. There was some engineering work on Hilltop Reservoir for $86,000. I should say 3 major pieces of equipment were purchased, were the wheel loader, a flood pump, and a peace officer patrol vehicle. And also a fire services vehicle. MRC additions included the header replacements, both the header trench and the fire header trench, ammonia alarms, and stage equipment. The pool additions included repainting, gate replacements, and storage bins, and all of these additions totaled $169,000 for the year. Major parks and trails saw the Barton Park improvements at $208,000, and trail replacements for the 2 sections at $111,000, with some signs and minor work done at Canet Park. Projects with no major work done or not started included the CN crossing lights and gates on 2 road crossings in town, the water treatment plant office, and Hilltop Reservoir, as well as the roofing repairs to the government center. All other projects budgeted for the year have either been purchased or completed, with the exception of the water and lagoon projects that are still ongoing. And last but not least, the major capital disposal for the year was the operations wheel loader when it was traded in purchasing the new loader. So overall, the town stuck to its budgeted and operational capital plan. The town achieved most of its objectives for the year, as well as took on additional tasks during the evacuation disaster events throughout the year. And the town's operation resulted in a slight unrestricted surplus for the year.
Okay. So a couple of things I'll start by saying. First off, for the millions of people watching at home, not sure how many there is, Chris, but I would guess a few
7.
thousand. 7? The 7 people watching at home. This might seem really boring because we're not asking a lot of questions, going through stuff, but you'll, if you don't have a copy of the package, you can get it from our town website. It's 20-some pages long, and we do spend a bunch of time with the auditor ahead of time and with Roland to go through them all line by line to make sure we're clear on what's going on. Purpose of our financial statements are twofold: A, to measure our financial success for the year, and B, for the auditor to make sure that somebody with eyes from the outside make sure that what we're doing is correct, and that the numbers that we are stating are correct and haven't been influenced in any way. And so the end result is, we had a big year last year. We made some changes in staffing and made some things that happened in our budget. We set out a number of capital things that we still wanted to get done. And in the middle of all that, we had some big fire event stuff happen where we had, literally thousands of evacuees come to our community. Additionally, there was a period where we were wondering if we were going to be leaving our community. And so it is hard to be productive during that time on regular day-to-day stuff because you're so consumed with the immediate things that need to get done. Additionally, there's also costs that are associated with when those events come to town. The end result, if you're looking at our financial statements, basically the way it looks. So, we paid off more debt, we increased our reserves, and we have a bit of a surplus at the end of the year. Not so much that we didn't achieve something, not so much that we didn't budget properly, but I want to commend our departments and our directors for sticking to what we asked them to do and completing what we asked them to commit to getting done. And so I will say that Roland, appreciate all the information. Alan, always appreciate you taking a look at this stuff. But you know, if you wanted a model financial statement to use, I would challenge any municipality to do something better than what we did. So that comes from administration, it comes from council. I think it's a great job, everybody, and very proud of what we accomplished last year. I will say though, a couple of things. The slideshow is great, Roland. It would be great to throw it on as some of our communication stuff. We're big on communication. Throw it on our website when we publish some of this thing. So if somebody wants to go through in more detail, that they can do that. I'm sure we can pump that out tomorrow morning. With that, any other questions or comments from council? Joy, sorry, Councilor McGregor.
Joy works great too. That is my name. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Roland as well. You don't hear that all the time from an auditor, how good the books are, how easy people are to work with them, that they have no recommendations needed, that they don't need to clean up a bunch of notes. So good job to you and your team. As I said, that's not always the case when people get an audit at the end of the year. Sometimes you don't get an attaboy. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Council's nodding and doing a bunch of dittos. Councilor Gramlich, he's got one thumb up. I'd give you two because I'm that guy. But with that, I would entertain a motion. Councilor King.
I'll make a motion that council approves the financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2019 as presented.
Any discussion? Call the question, those in favor? That is carried. Alan, I should have asked you if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Nope, that's all good. I think you've covered it all.
Okay, perfect. Appreciate everything that you do every time, and great to know that everybody's on the right track here. Good luck in the big city, and we'll see you next year.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good luck with the next year.
It'll be interesting for sure.
I'm going to check out now.
Okay, we'll see you later.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, it will be interesting as we move forward for sure that, you know, this year obviously is going to have heightened challenges, and, you know, we're going to get our financials here later, but that's a good foundation, you know, going into a period like that of uncertainty and not sure what's going to go, how much departments are going to be impacted. I can tell you from previous years where we had a different conversation after our audited statements. This is a nice position to be in going into that kind of year. So with that, we will jump into our next report, which is fire ban bylaw. So quick recap, we did this one last week, but apparently we had the number wrong on our report. And so the bylaw that we approved is the wrong number. And so I think I might just ask for a motion and get into it. Councillor King.
Are we going to finish the last motion?
No, because we're taking that one off for right now. That was the rule.
Okay.
Okay. Gordon, sorry, do you have anything to add before we get into this?
Just that it was an oversight with our employees working off-site and on-site, and we're going to put in procedures that this won't happen again, with the control of the bylaw numbers being set with the executive assistant. So, and our recommendation in the bylaw is that after talking to municipal affairs, to repeal the 16/2020, the fire bylaw, and read the necessary readings to institute bylaw 18, 2020 for the fire ban bylaw.
Okay, so I noticed though that there is no motion to repeal the 16 one.
The appeal is within the bylaw as number 1.
Okay. Okay. Some cracks I could make about the stuff that slips through the cracks with a temporary CAO, but we'll leave those ones for another day, hey? So with that, motion, let's get into it. Councillor Graham.
That the fire ban bylaw number 18-2020 receive first reading.
Any discussion? Call the question, those in favor. That's carried. Councillor Busk.
Make a motion that the fire ban bylaw number 18/2020 receive second reading.
Any discussion? Call the question, those in favor. That's carried. Councillor Brandel.
That council gives unanimous consent to give the fire ban bylaw 18/2020 third and final reading.
Any discussion? Call the question, those in favor. That is carried. And lastly, Councillor King.
That the fire ban bylaw number 18/2020 receives third and final reading.
Any discussion? Call the question, those in favor. That is carried. Gordon, I appreciate you not saying anything about the mayor having to check these over too and throwing him under the bus. First quarter budget results. Roll on page 81 in our package.
All right, so attached to this report is the overview, the overall cost summary from January 1st until March 31st on page 86 of the agenda package. And then the purpose of this report is just to give you guys an update from January 1st to March 31st. And so the numbers that you see percentage-wise would show up on that summary page that's attached. And with that, I'll just get into there. So administration is presenting to council first quarter year-to-date results and projections for the operating budget. First quarter results are mostly in line with expectations. This quarter had a minimal impact from the COVID-19, and expectations are that there will be further impacts as a result of COVID in later quarters. So overall in this one, you'll see very little impact from COVID. And I expect to see some more impacts, after March when things started shutting down. Operating budget, so overall expenditures, actuals versus budget, stand at 21% for the first quarter in 2020. Just as a note, not all cost centers incur costs equally throughout the year due to contributions, requisitions, contract payments. There may be higher or lower in some cases, just due to the nature of the expenses. So I'll start off with legislative expenditures, which includes council's budget for the year, and it sits at 19% of its current budget. If legislative services keeps track, it should remain on budget for the entire year. Administration costs include general administration, finance department, the chief administrative officer, information technology, the project manager, and health and safety. So starting off on general administration, it's overall expended 29% of its budget. Costs are a bit lower here due to some position vacancies for a brief time. So one area of concern is that employee recruitment costs for the year have already expended 70% of its budget in the first quarter. Expectation here is that at current trends, these costs may or will exceed budget for the year. Legal services is another area of concern, which has already reached its budgeted amount for the year. And should there be any more legal issues that we need to deal with, there is no longer budget room left for that. Communications is trending slightly higher for the year and has expended 32% of its budget. This is due to the additional communication services around COVID-19 right there at late end of March. Finance services has expended 25% of its budget. Wages are slightly lower for the quarter just due to a vacant position in the tax department. And expectations are that this slight reduction for the quarter will be offset in future quarters when we bring that person back online and give them additional help. CAO has expended 60% of its overall budget. This is directly attributed to the retiring of the previous CAO, and as a result, the budget in this area will exceed the budgeted amounts for the year, with the estimated cost overruns in the area anticipated to be around $60,000 to $70,000 for the year. IT services has expended 32% of its budget for the year. This is in line with expectations. One of the biggest costs is the annual license fee for the software that the finance department uses, and that has been expended for the quarter. Project manager costs are in line with expectations and will be added to capital projects as they happen throughout the year. Health and safety has expended 24% of its budget. There's a bit of an increase in overtime costs here as a result of COVID and getting some of that up and running at the very beginning. Training costs for the year, we're right around the budgeted cost for the year. However, there is a municipal cannabis transition grant in the amount of $5,000 that will cover those costs. Police services includes the first payment for the year as well as wages for the quarter at 24%. Fire services is operating at 30% of budget for the year. Equipment repairs continue to be a concern. They're currently sitting at 40%. However, with some of the new vehicles, we're hoping that we can stay on track. One additional item of concern for on the revenue side is due to COVID. We've been fortunate to participate in out-of-town deployments and also training using our training facility. With COVID around, we could see this additional revenue lost. Disaster services includes the Fire Spark program and currently is 15% of budget. This usually spikes again during the summer. Community enforcement has spent 18% of its budget. This service includes both the community peace officers and their time spent on animal control. Overtime is trending a bit high at 70% of budgets. If this trend continues, there will be a cost overrun for overtime. And this is mainly a result of the additional time due to COVID-19 as well as time spent on weekends looking after animals. Photo radar revenue for the year amounts to $60,000 with contracted services of $19,000, resulting in net revenue of $41,000. Photo radar is currently not operating. However, as prior outstanding fines are paid, revenue continues to be received. Expectations here is that overall photo radar revenues for the year will be a little bit lower than expected. However, this has no operational impact as the net revenue from this is transferred to reserves to fund the parks and green spaces. Moving on to operations, it's expended 18% of its budget. Many costs incurred by operations occur during the summer months. This is mainly in line with expectations. So one of the biggest areas of concerns here is under the snow removal budget. We had that large dump of snow here late in the season that really clogged up our roads and stretched us to capacity. And so we had to really stretch our contracted services. And as a result of that, 75% of that contracted services budget has been expended for the year. So if there's an additional large snow dump later on in the fall, we're going to have challenges with that with staying on budget.
Well, we also have a snow reserve that we haven't tapped into, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So we do have the reserve there. It's just the, we might have to tap into that if we see what we saw late in the season here again, early.
Okay.
Airport services includes the contribution to the airport, and this will be paid out to the airport at a later date. Water and wastewater services, both are in line with budgeted expectations. Revenues in line with expectations at 26-27% for the quarter, and both have expended 20% of their expense budgets. Again, a major cost is the water line breaks and repairs, as well as sewage and drainage issues, which normally happens when you have running water over the second, third quarters. Garbage services are mostly in line with expectations. 27% of the revenue has been billed for. Expenditures are a little low at 13% for the year. That's strictly due to the garbage invoice that we received from the Landfill Commission, which makes up the bulk of the expense in this, which is around $220 to $260, which we usually get in the summer or late fall. FCSS includes both FCSS and ParentLink. Overall revenue and expenses are in line with the expectations for first quarter. You'll see a large budget variation here due to the ParentLink program that's been closed down. However, this won't have an impact on operational revenues or expenditures, as it was 100% funded by the province. Daycare expenditures included some insurance and minor repairs on the building. There'll be some minor cost savings here as the daycare has been demolished. Planning and Development has expended 22% of its budget for the year. All expenditures so far are in line with expectations. You'll see a higher than expected revenue number shown at 61%, and that's because the Planning Department received a FREA grant, Forest Resource Improvement of Association of Alberta, gave them the grant to fund the land use bylaw amendments and fire smart regulations. Development permit applications are trending a bit higher for the quarter versus 2018, with 50% of the revenue already earned for the year. I did take a look at that as of today, and it has considerably slowed down. We'll see that in second and third quarter. Economic development, so far we haven't had any expenditures to date. It is unlikely that the full budgeted expenses will be incurred for the year just due to COVID-19 delaying the start of the program. And an update on that, the town received a CARES grant in the amount of $55,000 to help with economic programming. Land development, no new change there this year. No expenses for the year and no revenue for the year. There haven't been any lot sales in 2020. There was none in 2019. The last time we did have a lot sale was one in 2018. And based on just that information alone, we're not expecting to have a lot of lot sales this year. Commercial properties, operating expenditures are 15% of the budget for the year. Overall costs in this area are in line with expectations. The two biggest expense items in the cost center for the year are the two interest payments on the loan for the building on June 30th and December 31st. Community services includes the administration costs for parks and recreation, MRC, pool, and sports fields, as well as visitor information services. This is currently at 19%. The visitor information services is closed during the winter months, so we don't see many expenses there. And there might be some slight decreases in costs here due to COVID over the summer months. This all depends on how and when the Visitor Information Center can open up and operate, and it is unlikely there will be additional hirings for the positions, as it will be managed with existing staff. The town should see lower costs overall for the year. Recreation programs, that's our programming center, has expended 13% of its budget for the year, and most of the programming is done later on in the year. There is an expectation that both budgeted revenue and expenses will not be realized this year, likely due to COVID-19 having an impact on that and seeing what we're able to run. Parks and Recreation includes the MRC, pool, parks, and some of the visitor information center and sports fields and grass cutting, so the actual expenses there, not the administration. MRC and Arena have been operational for most of the quarter before it was shut down. MRC revenue stood at 22% of the year, and pool revenues were in line with expectations at about 25%. Both cost centers will see a sharp decrease in revenue. Currently, they are in the later phases of reopening, and it is unknown at this time when and if they will reopen before the end of the year. While they remain closed, however, there are sharp reductions in expenses as part-time staff in each area have been temporarily laid off, and many running costs have been reduced. Library, just an update on that. The expenses show at 50% there. I reached out to the library in early March and just had a discussion with them. We paid out half their contribution late March, early April, and we'll pay the remaining 50% out later on in the year as we gauge how COVID rolls out. Legacy Center just includes staffing costs. Overall trending a little bit lower. Just a note there, while the building shut down in late March, there will be ongoing costs for the center as staff will maintain the building. Property taxation, you can see a small amount of revenue there, and that's strictly the amounts of unpaid utility invoices that have been transferred to the tax roll in the first quarter. And general revenue is made up of revenues collected from ATCO Gas and Power from the franchise agreements, and it stood at 21% for the first quarter. So overall, operations appear on budget, with the exception of CAO services, and there was no real impact from COVID during the first quarter, as much of the shutdown happened later on in March.
Okay, Councillor McGregor.
I just have a couple questions, Roland. So you'll keep a little flag on this $60,000 or $70,000, right? So when we head into budget, we kind of already know we're over that. Tell me about, and sorry, this might be for Gary. Tell me about these animals that we're looking after on the weekend. Is that still ongoing with some kind of an investigation or something? Was there something a while ago that we were looking after dogs because of some, well, I gotta word things proper here today. I'm struggling. I'm thinking about just letting her block.
Gary knows what you're talking about here. Let him jump in.
Yeah,
Okay.
so last year we had an RCMP investigation that resulted in an animal being seized for an extended period of time. So far this year, we've had some other animals that have just been in the pound over the weekends. Of course, we don't staff our pound on weekends. Our peace officers come in and are paid overtime for maintaining the pound. And so, so far, it's just been that there's been more animals over the weekends and in the evenings and so on. But we're looking into alternate ways of doing things to try to keep that cost as low as possible.
Okay, thanks. And Roland, library. So do we have a guarantee from MSI every year that we get for the library?
Yeah.
Oh.
We get, it's slightly decreased. It started off a couple of years ago at about 65,000, and now it's down to about 57,000. So we have always allocated it to the library, and that's what we made the application for. And generally we would have to because we've budgeted for this year. I think the one change on that this year is they came late in this COVID thing and said your normal MSI operating can be used for any type of operational expense. Kind of waived the library contingent, but with it being kind of our only operating MSI grant, library, we could allocate some of it there, but it's, ours is just small in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Councillor Busk.
I'd like to make a motion that council accepts the report as information.
In discussion, I'll just add one thing here that, thanks, Roland. I always take this stuff with a grain of salt. Lots of municipalities are really big on making sure you bring first quarter, second quarter, third quarter updates. But really, from a very high level, it's just a snapshot. Some of the stuff happens at the end of the year. Some of the stuff gets expensed at different times. It depends on your receivables and payables when stuff is coming due. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. But I will say more than ever, that's how I've always felt in my head. But this one is good because I think, COVID is going to have an impact, right? It's going to have an impact on our stuff here, and revenues is going to be a big issue. Fire service is going to be a big one where we notice it. MRC, I think we're somewhat fortunate of the timing because we're kind of coming out of that season a little bit. And so it'll be interesting to see when we can get back into the MRC and so get some of those programmings going. However, with ball diamonds not being used and impacts to the pool in a season right when they were getting going and doing some stuff, there's already some significant revenue issues there. And these buildings, you don't just lock them up and they don't cost you anything. We're still spending money there. So it's going to have an impact, and it'll be interesting to see later in the year how big that impact is. So with that, motion on the floor, call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Okay. Thanks, Roland. Gary, we're going to talk about pandemic appendix on page 87 in our package.
Yes, so good evening. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about a plan that we put together for emergency social services in the time of pandemic. Of course, emergency social services is those human services that are dealt with during an emergency management context. We were waiting for some sort of guiding document from AHS or the government. I hadn't seen anything early with fire season coming up on us. We decided to create our own document. Since that time, towards the end of April, AHS issued some materials, and so did the province last week. It produced some materials actually since this plan was written and in your agendas. We are in alignment with what their recommendations are. So really high-level summary is that this is just a step as a guiding document so that we can know what some additional things to plan for during an ESS activation. It's not really a step-by-step definitive plan because those tend to not work so great during a time of an emergency. Throughout the plan, we're trying to recognize physical distancing. However, there are those times where life over limb comes into play. So removing people from an immediate danger supersedes the risk of infection. And that's one of the concepts that has been done through the emergency planning kind of context where we have to. The next point I want to raise is that as we would go into anything, we would be hoping to have a consultation with AHS and provincial emergency social services, but we also know that we have to be somewhat self-reliant to be able to make decisions, at least get things started as we go into any kind of event. So I'll walk you through the plan itself very, very quickly. In terms of evacuation, of course, we need to do that within the context of a pandemic underway. I won't go into a lot of the details other than the fact that I think it's another element that needs to be added into that whole decision-making process. If we're receiving evacuees, of course, we want to make sure our staff and volunteers are healthy. Reception centers probably would look different than what they've done in the past. We would be leaning more towards a drive-through type model. Interesting enough, as of last week, I got to see a new website that the province will be unveiling in about a week, where it'll allow people to register themselves through a mobile type of platform, so off your cell phone or any device, where you can register all your information. And then when you arrive at the reception center, it should be all pre-populated. And all we have to do is check people in and tell them where they're going to be staying. Accommodations would probably be run very similarly to what we did with the high-level evacuations last year. We would really try to stay away from group aggregate or congregate lodging, just because of the infection controls that would have to be put into place. So using hotel type spaces or other types of spaces would be our preferred. The one big challenge we know we're going to have is food services. What Fort Vermilion and Fort McMurray evacuees found was delivery of food meals to their hotel rooms worked the best. I know we've chatted with staff in other communities that house some of those evacuees, and that did work. That was really the only way that they were able to maintain that social distancing. So that would be something we would have to be planning for and working towards.
So, so just to be clear, in an emergency, lots of takeout and delivery.
That's right. And the other thing that they found in both for High Level and Fort Mac residents is that they were strongly encouraged to stay in their hotel rooms. So no activities for residents were planned, could be hosted within the communities. There was a lot of extra things that had to be done in terms of making sure that they had things to do, that they had access to phones and computers if they needed it. Even things such as getting prescriptions delivered became a bit of a challenge. So those are some of the things that we've factored. At least we've identified these, that there were going to be pieces that we know we're going to need to work on. And with that very high level overview, I just wanted to see if you have any questions.
I don't see any hands going up, Gary. I'll just say that, obviously this is timely, it wasn't far off of this date here, coming up here, that we were welcoming thousands of people from up north into our community last year. And so I'm very proud of how we handled that last year, largely because our staff and our people in our community really are ones that roll up their sleeves and say, we'll do whatever it takes. A lot of it you learn on the fly. Obviously, a pandemic makes things even more challenging. And I know that we won't have everything figured out, but I feel like this is a good start and a foundation that basically says we'll do what we need to do. We're going to be cautious. We're going to protect our people. We're going to make common sense decisions. And I think with that in mind, I think that's the right path to get started from a very high level. With that, I'd entertain a motion. Councillor Rusk.
Make a motion that council receive the pandemic appendix to the emergency social services plan for information.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Okay, this one is going to be more exciting and near and dear to our heart. Gary, let's talk about our own recovery plan and how we get our services back up and running.
So yes, we drafted a plan that mostly focused on community services, since community services is primarily the area department within the town that had the greatest impact, with a lot of our services being impacted. We've announced that our facilities are in programming is closed or suspended until June the 1st. As the government has created their relaunch documents, we've noticed that there are varying stages, which also includes most of recreation being in the latter stages of their relaunch. I think we also identify that there probably will be public expectation that things will return to normal as quickly as possible, which will also place increased demands on staff and on the town to be able to provide those types of services. We put together a plan, which is a working document. This document has changed a couple of times since we started working on it because the provincial authorities changed their timing or changed some of the requirements. So we need to adapt the plan accordingly. I'll just go straight into the plan and talk a little bit about some of the pieces on it. Right off the top, staffing is one of the challenges. We know that some of our staff have been reassigned or laid off or have had reduction in hours, and we have to give proper legal notice to people to bring them back. So there's going to be some challenges just getting everybody back to work when it's time. We also know that timing of daycare and other childcare could be a challenge for some staff. Specifically, dive into the pool, no pun intended. Recreation centers are considered the latest possible stage in the government's plan. And since this plan was actually written and put into your council packages, we have found out that Life Saving Society has additional requirements that they're going to have to be met. So we're already going to have to update this plan. If to meet all of the Life Saving Society's requirements, we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks of from the time where we can say, yes, we're going to open to the pool to actually can open. So we're really hoping that the province gives us a little bit of heads up so that we can get things going. But it involves, all the cleaning requirements. It involves getting our lifeguards back to work, making sure that they're trained, ready to go, meetings, health inspections, water samples, and a number of other pieces all come into alignment before we're ready to open. With that, we are knowing right now we have a pool sitting there with no water in it. So we're using this as an opportunity to do our shutdown maintenance right now. I think I've mentioned that before. We're trying to get as much of our shutdown pieces done now, so we hopefully don't have to shut down in the future for any planned maintenance anyways. The multi-rec center, the MRC, is a similar situation where rec centers are considered as part of step 3. The facility has been cleaned and shut down. HVAC systems have been reduced, and we've done all the things that we can to try to have it so that it's ready to go in the fall, or whenever it can be reopened. The challenge is we don't know what those requirements are going to be to bring it back up online. Unlike the pool, where we have the Life Saving Society that helps drive and dictate some of that stuff, we have some indications, but we have to wait on what the provincial government or AHS suggests. One of the challenges with MRC or rec centers as a whole is the government has expressed concerns about the large number of touch points that are throughout the facility. And the challenge will be is to ensure that there's cleaning throughout all of those touch points as we look at reopening. There could be an opportunity to open pieces of the MRC at a time, but that's not being currently contemplated by the province from what we are told. Once the MRC is brought up and made operational, a couple of challenges come into play. First off is that depending on timing, much of all our staff from the MRC have been moved over to parks and or operations. And so we will need to be able to get employees back. I'll talk about parks in a little bit, but that will place some other challenges on service levels overall. And then depending on timing, ice takes a little while for it to be made. It takes about a week for the ice to go in and some time for the ice to harden and be ready to go. So it will be a challenge just to, depending on timing, if we can get ice in place in the right time, bearing in mind that Simcoe is the major refrigerant contractor for most arenas in Alberta, or at least northern Alberta. And so we would also be reliant on when they can come and also get our plant up and running. In terms of recreation programming, this area is probably one where we have opportunities and restrictions. So in terms of our programming, we've canceled our events in ActiveNet up until June 1st. As things remain closed, the challenge is always making sure that we continue to cancel bookings at an appropriate time. And that's something that administration is proposing to do on a rolling basis in the future. Summer Splash is one of the interesting ones because the government has recently announced that summer day camps can go ahead with restrictions. We have a couple staff member working on what that could possibly look like. We don't have our plan finalized at this stage of the game. However, it would most likely be very small groups and not housed in the MRC. That's another requirement that the province is very clear about. We cannot use recreation facilities to house day camps. And the programming is going to have to be very different in that there can't be free play opportunities. We have to program the entire time for these children. So there's a lot more planning going into what it could possibly look like. We should have some answers later this week on that. In terms of other events, I mean, a lot of things have been canceled, but one of the opportunities that we saw is potential of doing a fireworks display for Canada Day, combining the fireworks from Riverboat Days and some of the funding we had for Canada Day and doing something that would be meeting the physical distancing restrictions as an example. There's other opportunities in terms of online programming and such that have happened, and I think been well received in the community. And I think the intent would be is to continue to move ahead with some of those online kinds of things. So as we also operate the Legacy Center, we know that Legacy Center operations kind of fall in two parts. The daycare, which is a separate entity, could reopen as part of stage one. I know that their staff and board are looking into doing some pieces with that. But the reopening of the facility in terms of removing all gathering restrictions probably won't happen until stage three. So I'll leave that one largely as is noted there, in the sense that the Wildlife Fire Legacy Corporation board also needs to make some motions similar to the towns going forward. Visitor Information Center, as Gordon had indicated, there's indications that it could be opening on a sooner basis. Interesting note that as of last week, Alberta Tourism was steering us towards more of a virtual tourism type package instead of actually reopening the Vic. That was just the direction that ministry was going. But at the same time there, we would have to bring back staff. We have a idea in terms of using some other staff that have been redeployed and or laid off in a more using them from other capacities to operate the Vic should we choose to reopen that. Parks operations is one area that we are going to see some reductions in service. We're going to be operating with a smaller crew this year, trying to make sure that physical distancing requirements are met. As an employer, that's one of our biggest challenges, is to be able to have enough vehicles and so on to make sure that people are spread out enough to meet the requirements. So one of the areas you'll probably see is that there will be less flower planting. We have committed to putting up the hanging baskets, but the actual planters with flowers that go on, let's say the boulevards or downtown area, likely will not happen. That is to save on the time spent watering, actually, and to help meet our staffing needs. And we have actually a fairly comprehensive plan that we worked with the park staff on to try to make sure that we can hit the majority of the requirements, and the public shouldn't see that many challenges. In terms of contractors under parks operations, we're going to be reducing our contractors in terms of the levels that they would be doing their mowing. Some cases, the ball diamonds get mowed up to twice a week. It'll probably be more like mowed every 1 to 2 weeks. This is also a good opportunity to allow us for us to overseed and aerate and allow some of the grass to grow in on some of those stressed out areas. So it's actually not such a bad thing in terms of for our grass. And then also the other thing under parks is very likely that the spray park will remain closed throughout the rest of the summer. That's just a recommendation that has come forward from Alberta Health Services. The last piece under parks is the Porta-Potties. They have come out with Porta-Potty guidelines, which require very frequent cleaning and sanitation. Within our current resources, that's just not possible to make happen. We would have to have hand washing stations, hand sanitizing stations at every porta potty, plus they would have to be sanitized multiple times a day. So that's something at current we're not even considering unless council gives us feedback otherwise. The last piece, and it was just a comment in the report, is that we made the decision to suspend or pause automatic traffic enforcement, so photo radar, and that's not really factored into the plan that the government released in terms of relaunch, so that service could be resumed at any time that we as a town so choose. And then the other thing, that piece that we also included in here is a bit of a short comment around communications and trying to use this as an opportunity just as much as a saying what the closures are going to be. We could also use this as an opportunity to help educate people in terms of the services that we provide. So that's a very high level, quick overview of what we're looking at. Our recommendation is that you receive this report for information and consider having us reopen facilities based upon the timing that the Relaunch Alberta strategy in the province allows us, instead of having a set date and changing that date going forward basis. And that administration will provide you the updates as we can through the regular update channels.
Okay, so to be clear, Gary, we're doing a motion that's bigger than just accepting this for information. We're doing the motion that's requested on page 94 in our package.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, let's get into some questions. Councillor Busk.
So Gary, I'm just curious. It's tough enough on the kids right now going through the parks and stuff like this. I understand the touch points and stuff like this being a transmission point. Just wondering if that spray park, if we had it somehow locked on so that the water continuously sprayed, so the kids didn't have to be touching that, only open for 3-4 hours, that's not an option?
Likely not. When it was raised with Alberta Health Services, the response was not great. As we go throughout the year, I do have an email contact where we can contact their pandemic planning team, and we can certainly pose the question to them again.
Well, I'm just curious because I back onto a park, I see a ton of kids all over the place. And if we're talking sanitization and stuff like that, are we doing enough now, or are we leaving ourselves open? Like, what's the deal? Like, are our staff going out there and wiping down the swings every couple hours? I don't think so. So I'm just, what's the procedure?
Yeah, so basically we are following the government's guidelines when it comes to sanitization. As of last week, they had, all the way along, the government has said it's up to municipalities to make their own decisions around playgrounds. As of last week, they have said that playgrounds are good to open, and they actually didn't even mention sanitization in terms of their reopening strategy, that they're saying that there shouldn't be any reason why they shouldn't be closed. There's actually conflicting research around sanitizing playgrounds because, first off, they are outside. Who knows how long viruses actually can live on surfaces outside. Secondly, though, a lot of the chemicals you would use to sanitize a playground are also react with the plastic and can shorten your lifespan of your playground. So playground manufacturers are coming out saying, please don't use these types of certain chemicals to sanitize playgrounds. So our playgrounds are not being sanitized. We have put out messaging saying, practice good hygiene practices before, while you're, or after you're playing. Use hand sanitizer, and then make sure your kids wash their hands well when they get home. So that's basically how we've been addressing the playground issue.
Okay, Councillor McGregor wants to play on that one, I'm sure.
So yeah, no, I'm good with the playgrounds. I like the fact that we've decided that, it's up to the responsibility of the people taking whoever they are to the playground there. Then you go home and wash your hands. As someone that has little friends, I cannot imagine them taken to the splash park and everyone staying 6 feet apart. They'll be rolling on goddamn top of each other. Like, they're just kids. They can't even help themselves. I struggle here in Hilda even. I'm always like, remember, it's 6 feet distance. We can play, but we got to stay 6 feet. So I would hate to open a splash park and do that to a parent, an auntie, a grandparent, where we're already struggling just to keep these people in check and educated. That'd be a tough one. So I'm okay with not at all opening that. I know it's tough, but it's tough. It's a different year. It is what it is. Kids are resilient. They'll make her through not having the splash park open. And I really like this plan. I like that you guys are ahead of it. And as far as the skate park goes, there is certain clientele that will always use the skate park. They're just skateboarders, scooters. When my kid was little, he was one of them. You will not keep the distance there. But in saying that, some of those kids, that is their only safe haven out of what they are living in or putting up with right now. So we don't need to open the splash park. The skate park, it will do its thing. It will all subside and it will be okay. I mean, I see some people keep their kids apart. Some go there on their own because they're tired of being yelled at by the people and the adults in their house. And there's nothing we can do to change that. So that's my 10 cents. Thanks though, Gary. I really like this plan.
Okay,
And I
Council-
was just going to comment about the skate park. Our skate park has been open the whole time, whereas some other municipalities have closed theirs. They fenced them off because that's what you'd have to do, basically. We took the approach that skateboarding could happen anywhere, whether it be in that park or in a parking lot or on someone's driveway. So really, the hazard and the risk isn't any different. I mean, they could come on other town properties and skateboard in the parking lot. We'd have a hard time restricting that. So that's where we made the decision to leave it open.
Okay, Councillor Brandel and then Graham.
Mute.
Sorry. Sounds like the restrictions on the summer splash are going to be pretty restrictive. Can you comment on the locations that you're thinking of? Because, you know, we don't have that many facilities. So does that mean it's going to be the Legacy? And then with the daycare running, is that going to be too many kids in one building? Like,
so we had a couple of locations in mind. We don't have anything definitive. That's one of the things that's still outstanding on the checklist. The other idea was if we could get permission to use the back door and the multi-purpose room only at the MRC, although they were pretty clear that we can't be using the MRC at all, but we were still going to ask that. Legacy Center is an option. Other options could be any locations such as potentially a room or a classroom at a school, but again, we need to get permissions in place to do that, or facilities such as the Legion or another type of building. But we know that there's going to be cost implications to some of those options. So it's a matter of trying to figure out what's cost versus benefit, because we're also going to need to have relatively small groups. 10 children at a time. You have to staff that with at least 2 staff. So there's going to be significant costs, more than normal to be able to operate it. The other challenge is going to be with Summer Splash is what we're looking at is it would be 10 kids at a time. They would go part days, and we would have to have commitments throughout most of the summer, where before you could sign your kid up for certain weeks, and if you're going to be away some other weeks you wouldn't have to, just because of the cost implications. We were looking at making it so that you'd have to sign your child up for the entire summer, but it being that it's part-time, you could kind of evaluate and say, is this worth it, right? Is it worth sending my kids to Summer Splash on a part-time basis for the entire summer, knowing that they might miss some of the days because of family vacation. So those are just things that we're looking at. It's not engraved in stone, but it is there are some significant challenges to trying to meet all the requirements.
wow, I look forward to hearing that plan.
Okay, Councillor Gramlich.
I just was going to comment on the park situation. I think the biggest difference between a skate park, a playground, and the water park is the possible transmission between the water itself. I think that would be why the regulation's in place. No one knows if or what transmits. So excellent plan, and I commend you on that, Gary, and I agree with it all.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just weigh in here as I see no more hands. A couple of things. First off, you know, one of the big differences between you know, the playgrounds maybe and the splash park is the fact that if we are turning on the splash park, we're basically saying, hey, come on, use the splash park. In reality, what we're saying here with a number of these things is we are doing the bare minimum. You know, a lot of the risk is going to be on you to figure out as a user how you want to manage that risk. I'm very much a community-minded person. I'm a customer service-minded person. That's my background. I love when we can do things because I do think that the town of Slave Lake is a customer service-based business. That being said, during times like this, like I think our emphasis on a time when we don't know our staff capacity as we move forward, we're going to have to be dealing with things like sicknesses and illnesses on a larger scale. We've got budget implications that we're worried about costs and things as we go along. You know, I think our mentality as we move forward should be doing the bare minimum to get by based on the information that I have today and where we're headed until we start to see larger light at that end of that tunnel, that we need to be careful how much we chew off there. Councillor Brandel,
I'll make a motion
go for it.
that town facilities and services closed as a result of the public health orders issued in response of the COVID-19 pandemic be relaunched based on the phasing and direction of the government of Alberta, and that administration report back to council on the ongoing relaunch efforts.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. So I guess the biggest message, because I do get actually a lot of questions about playground and skateboard park, and I guess the message that should be going out is we are not closing these facilities because we don't want to spend our day chasing you away and managing the problem. We're leaving it up to common sense there, that if you want to, there's a risk associated with that and you need to navigate that on your own. Whether that be yourself as an individual or your children, that responsibility is on you. It is not on us. Okay. Next, Mayor's Corner. What's going on in Mayor's Corner? Obviously long weekend last weekend. A ton of people came to town. Campsites seemed to be busy. The stores were incredibly busy. Commend all the businesses there who worked hard to try and keep maintain social distancing and things going on. But will say, whether it's watching my Facebook feeds or being out at those stores or driving around town, you could tell that although the majority of people thought social distancing was important this weekend, there was definitely a group that didn't see it as important. And so it will be interesting to see what happens with COVID cases over the next 7 to 10 days. Realistically, we're probably at a lower exposure here in the north just because of the data that exists. However, all it takes is a couple of people coming from down south where their numbers seem to be higher, and we could be in a totally different scenario. So just continue to caution people there that, holy Lord in heaven, we don't want to go backwards. So please work with us to keep us moving forward, and keep washing your hands, keep being cautious, keep having precautions. The provinces came out with this last minute thing right before this last minute change right before May long weekend, which I don't know if it was strategic or not strategic, but saying, hey, you can gather up with 50 people outside if you all keep your social distance. And sounds great, and it sounds, it's great when we're starving to be around people, but it comes with, that works if everybody takes it seriously, and if it doesn't, man, that is a potential hazard. So I encourage people to continue visiting with people and continue to get out there. I've had friends in our own backyard or whatever else sitting around the fire. It was interesting because I had to set up the camper, so they had their own washroom. They brought their own chairs. They brought their own drinks. It was only one other couple. I don't know how I'd manage that with 10 people. But I just continue to say to people, please, we do not want to go backwards. Take this stuff seriously. One moment of that doesn't really matter, and we're right back where we were. The MLA's office reached out to me last week too, looking for some help, renewed interest in advocating for ambulance services, for an investment in the infrastructure over there, or ambulance base, something council's been fighting for a while. Wanted some documentation, some more history stuff, so I was working on putting that together. Great to see his office fighting for that, and we look forward to some results there. Additionally, council's been busy here with some stuff with CAO. We're been working through our last bit of effort here to select one, and hopefully we'll have some good announcements here coming in the very near future, as we intend to put forth an offer to someone here right away. Lastly, as I'm at the town office here tonight, I was snooping because there's not a lot of people around, so it's amazing the freedom you can have to go snoop and find stuff. But being candid, I wasn't really snooping, but sitting on our executive director's desk was a letter that we just recently got back from transportation in regards to our questions that we've been asking from the Minister of Transportation. So there's a detailed response to all of that. So I'll get Joanna to scan and send that out. But because we really advocated to our public to get involved, and they did. And I appreciate all the people that did, because I don't know if we would have the announcements that we had without their help. There is some investment coming, which is exciting. We'll make sure that we, Gordon, if you make sure that that letter gets published there on our town website. Chris does a little thing about communications there and pumps that out. So people that did send those responses get some answers. Realistically, the minister's office theoretically will send those to all those people that emailed them, which I know there were hundreds, because we made sure we were CC'd in them all. But just in case they don't, let's put that out there. Additional to that, Michael Botros, he's one of the like regional directors for this area. And so I had reached out to him about 2 weeks ago. I'll follow up with him in regards to a little bit more specific detail to our region. A lot of people ask, okay, you know, I'm here, they're doing X here and Y there and whatever else. What does that mean? What does it start? What does it end? Asked him for some of that. He committed to getting it for me. So I'll hunt him down and be nice to share some more specific information. So like residents can understand what exactly transportation is doing in the area, as the announcements that we got so far are a lot higher level than maybe we would like. And with that, you know, just keeping updated here, obviously, as things are changing. Phase 1 obviously has started. Lots of businesses taking their time getting into this, trying to navigate, adapting and making changes as they go along. Appreciate all of them doing that, and you know, we'll kind of keep our ear to the ground and see what phase 2 is going to look like. I think for everybody, it's just a matter of waiting and seeing what happens here. And you know, I think for all of Alberta, the next 7 to 10 days is really going to give us an indication if we're on the right path or not. And I really hope we are. We have some correspondence. We have a number of pieces of correspondence, so let's go through them real quick. First one, High Prairie and District Children's Resource Council basically saying thanks for coming and joining our group. For those watching, essentially our ParentLink program was shut down. It was a provincially funded organization, shut down the end of March. So we're partnering with the town of High Prairie there to deliver some of the services and looking at our scope in that. And so there's something to thank you for that. And you know, Gary, I imagine that's a project you're going to have to navigate through all this COVID stuff as well. Next was Royal Bank gave us some information on all the things that they are doing and related to COVID and how they're keeping their clients safe. Thanks for that information. The next one is will probably just require a little bit more discussion. So essentially, Complete Waste Solutions has put in an application. Essentially, they've put a bunkhouse on site, and so that requires an application to be able to do that, and there's a fee for that. And so with that, they've asked us to waive that fee. So that fee is $1,000. You know, they're talking about the fact that we have to lay off our employees. You know, we understand the impacts to oil and gas for sure. The question will be, should we do that? And so, you know, one of the things that if we're going to do that, I would suggest, you know, to do that for one business and not do it for others, probably puts us in a unique situation. So I would maybe ask administration to bring back a small report that outlines the actual financial impact. The actual financial impact of this. I believe it's $1,000, but we want to confirm that. Secondly, to understand, like, if we did this for everyone for the rest of the year, what would that look like? What are the actual budget impacts on that? Council, you guys okay with that? I see nodding and thumbs, good, whatever else. So I'll formally make a motion that that administration bring back a report in regards to waiving the fees for Complete Waste Solutions for their recent application, and to include budget impacts if we were to do for future applications for 2020. Does that make sense, Gord? Joanna's good. You can give me a thumbs up.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. So we'll debate that at a future meeting. Next was in regards to West Fraser. And so, it's been interesting because there actually has been some talk behind the scenes in regards to tree planting, how that's going to work, these tree planters coming into your community, what safety measures are being put in place. And so they just want to inform us that they are doing that. I've actually had some calls from the mills. They do actually a really great job of keeping me updated when things are going on, even with shifts that they're having to reduce and things going on. It's great to see that they're all running at good capacity. It'll be more exciting when Ontario opens up and gets some more lumber moving towards that market, because that has an impact on our guys locally. But tree planting will go on. Last one is from Municipal Affairs, which talks about all the great things that our provincial government is doing to help us through COVID and answering some of those questions. I will say a lot of the help so far has been geared towards businesses and to individuals. Although they're there to help municipalities financially wise, we haven't seen a ton at this point. Some extensions and things given to make it easier for our residents, which I guess is who we're advocating for as well, and we appreciate. The one that we're really waiting on is some announcements. They did a call out in end of April, first part of May, basically saying, listen, we want to look at projects. They're doing internally, and that's where a lot of this stuff comes from, highways, that we're going to spend some more money in transportation. Capital creates jobs, capital gets people working, capital stimulates economies. And so it's great to see them spending money on their own projects. We're curious to know if there's going to be any incentives or stimulus into the municipal projects to try and drive some of those forward. So we've parked most of ours for 2020, just basically on that same premise that we talked about earlier here tonight that I had mentioned in recreation, and we've talked about in previous meetings, that we are concerned about costs and capacity as we move forward, and probably more capacity than costs. So it will be interesting. We were worried about is with COVID, with all the pieces built around, will it cost us more to do projects? Will it be easier to do projects? Now all of a sudden, with the province announcing a bunch of projects, there is going to be harder to get contractors. I feel like it's a dartboard, and every week we throw a dart at it, and hopefully we're in the right area and we're getting close. And then next week we try again because the information changes. So I think right now, from a municipal perspective, that's the one we're watching the most closely. The most. I'm not even sure which way to say that, but I guess we'll wait and see what happens. Motion to accept the correspondence as information. Thank you, Councillor Gramlich. Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. So lastly, our meeting is not over, but it is over for the public portion. So I would entertain a motion to go on camera to deal with the rest of our night. Thank you, Councillor Gramlich. Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Councillor King, your video's off again. I'm assuming she's in favor, and so we will move forward. Thank you. We will jump off of this link and get into another one here in about 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody.